Hi, I'm Lisa Gunther with Canadian Cattlemen, and I'm here with Kelly Sidoric, our Depth of Field columnist. And so, Kelly, tell us a little bit about feedback, giving feedback.
Well, in that column, when we're talking about giving and receiving feedback, one of the first things that was occurring to me, is that that's probably a skill set that in the regular business world, it, is something that people need to become adept at. And as we've talked, our farms and ranches are no different. We need to improve the skills that we have in that department. And I think giving and receiving feedback can be something that is more challenging.
So we talked a little bit about a scenario, say, involving fencing, which is always everybody's favorite chore, I think.
Yes, honestly.
What would be a way to handle that maybe if the fencing job wasn't quite up to par? How would you approach that?
I think one of the important pieces of it is to try to remember that these things aren't personal. It's just, and they're given in a way that if you can think of it from the constructive point of view, that really to have a better outcome, right? But one of the things that I think sometimes wondering about is that whether the people that are really doing the tasks are actually understanding the why we're doing it. So when we talk about the fencing and recognizing that in the scenario we used, it's a managed grazing intensive with lots of paddocks, and so what are some of the reasons that we're doing that? Well, we're trying to improve productivity and enhance the forage growth. We want to make sure that we are looking after the health of the animals and making sure that the other people really understand why. And I mean, even in that context, you can take it down to the economic advantage too, when you think about how many dollars and cents there is. Even another scenario just to pop in was with a recent livestock handling and talking about the amount of shrink, if the animals aren't handled in a quiet manner and, just take a bit of percentage of weight, and when their yearlings are worth over $3 a pound easy, that adds up quickly. So I guess in a nutshell, making sure that the people understand the why and the background of why we're doing that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and another thing we kind of talked about was also making sure they actually have what they need to do the job.
100%, and so, approaching it with the idea of, these are some of the shortfalls, if you will. So what are some other things that we can do or provide to have an improved outcome? So maybe it was tools, maybe needed more tools. Maybe it was a better understanding. Maybe it was knowledge of actually how does an electric fence work, for example.
Right.
Some of those kind of things.
Yeah. So Kelly, tell me how caviar relates to giving feedback.
That's another concept that comes up that was developed by Chris Voss, the former FBI negotiator that people will recognize from my previous columns. And so the C in caviar is wanting to make sure that you're remaining curious. So what can I still learn? And even going back to our other scenario, what information do I need as the person giving feedback that I don't have? It's easy for us to make assumptions too, well, they did a crap job because of whatever. But so remaining curious. Another one, and this is, valid, is that accept that the response may be high. Sometimes, even though we keep saying, don't take it personally, people still do, and then they'll have an emotional response. So another one, the V, I thought was really helpful, was for the person giving the feedback to set up a situation, not with the intended receiver of it, but a trusted advisor, to just be able to vent and get some of that frustration out. And then that other trusted person can say, okay, maybe you better calm down with the, I can tell you're revved in that, or here's another approach.
And so I guess the idea of that is to do it before you get to the
yes,
meeting, obviously, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the rehearsal or the role playing, which can be a valid thing, a good strategy to approach. And especially things that have a bit of emotion, if you can do a bit of practice on that. Mm-hmm. The I is identifying the issue. So making sure that everybody's really clear, what is the challenge that's being faced here or the situation, and not be too vague and nebulous about it.
Right.
And then he uses a accusation audit where really you try to zero in on what's going on, but also having empathy and understanding and maybe a shift of perspective. So, what was going on with that person that they weren't performing as you had hoped. So trying to, and he, having 5 or 10 points, and then also acknowledging that, I know you might be feeling angry with the situation, for example, or upset, whatever the case may be. And then I really like how he, in that part of it, has a follow-up question about, what are the steps that we could take going forward to make sure this doesn't happen again. So, how can things be different? But again, still making it a bit, it's not all on one person, but what can we do as a team or an organization to make sure that we shift those up? And is to remember that the counterpart is not the adversary, that it's actually the situation that is. So, which again circles back to the idea of don't make it personal. This isn't personal, right?
Yeah, it's not the person, it's the problem.
That we need to solve, yes. And honestly, I think some people are better at that than others, but just something to also recognize that we all will approach these somewhat differently, and being mindful of that.
Yeah. So can we go back to the accusation audit for a minute? Because that's not really a term I'd ever heard before. And he kind of has a unique way of, I guess, anticipating how the other party might react and kind of diffusing that.
Yes. So where the idea of, I know you might be feeling really angry because of, what has gone on. And then the person's like, well, I was a bit frustrated, but I wasn't angry, so just acknowledging that what the person's experiencing, and maybe he gives it room, if you will, to be higher than it actually is, and then people can, well, no, it's not really that bad. So I don't know if you would even consider that perhaps presenting kind of the worst case scenario, and then the person's response is, well, no, it's not that extreme.
Right.
That's one of the strategies that it goes along with his empathy approach too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been in maybe a situation where the opposite has happened, where somebody has said, well, no, you shouldn't be feeling that way because it's not that bad, right? And actually we're just like totally seething inside, but we can't then really express that without having a conflict.
Right.
And so he's kind of doing he's suggesting the opposite, saying like, as you say, give it room. So
yes,
and then people can either say, oh, it's not that bad or whatever, right?
Right.
Like it's kind of acknowledging that it's difficult.
Yeah, and maybe the piece about, as we talk, giving it enough space so that, it can be talked about and worked through. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're not even really giving it any space, then it's not going to be an honest, open conversation, I don't suspect.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that's a very interesting way to approach that. I think, sometimes our instinct is to deny
yes.
that there's an emotional response or
yes.
And he's saying, no, you should acknowledge it.
Exactly. Another interesting exercise is the fishbowl exercise. I guess that could be similar to the 360-degree feedback, mm-hmm. but one of the ways, where you actually are in a small group and somebody is kind of in the hot seat, if you will, or the center seat, and you intentionally go around and talk about what you appreciate about that person.
Right.
And
so that's positive feedback.
Positive feedback, yeah. Right? Yeah, the constructive piece of it. And that's something that, just to get practice to hear that is really difficult. And another group that I worked with, we actually just did it with cards. And so everybody had their own card, and then they passed it around and people wrote down things that they appreciated about each one of us, and that was boy, that just went a long way to really build some positive feelings and trust within the team, you know, because, you know, sometimes we aren't very good at saying those things that we appreciate or that we admire about people, and
Right.
it's an important element.
And also learning how to accept positive feedback, I think, for a lot
Honestly,
of us is
yes,
a learned skill, I guess, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
not to minimize it, right?
Yeah.
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 Or
Yeah.
brush it off.
Yeah. Well, I think you also had some tips on just how to take feedback, perhaps that is hopefully constructive, but a little bit critical.
I think that you have to put it into context too, and about the active listening, and it goes back to the caviar again from the other side of it, the curiosity. So, one of the starting points of that might be help me to understand, and get clarity of what actually is going wrong here, So as much as possible, trying to be open for both with the listening to understand, right? Not to be understood.
Right. Yeah. Not just listening to formulate a response, but to try to, as you say, understand what the other person is trying to get at.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to that other thing that we talked about where you can be saying, okay, this is what happened, but how can we take some steps to improve or ensure that doesn't happen again? So really putting a positive closure on it, as you will, for action steps that people can both feel confident that is going to improve the situation.
Right. Great. Well, anything else you want to add today?
No, I think that's excellent. I always enjoy visiting.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. Great chatting with you again.
Good. Thanks, Lisa.